You are listening to the audiobook Veilshatter, Legends of Elyndar, now available on Amazon, Audible, and wherever books are sold, featuring our three unforgettable heroes. An epic adventure begins.
Unbidden visitors. Above the churning labyrinth of Avestra's morning market, Liora pressed herself into the shadow-thick gallery rail, birchboard clutched against her ribs, breath feathered and uneven. The city seethed beneath her. Merchant stalls thrown up in defiant color, root-tangled streets webbed with memory wards, half bright in the flawed early light. Dawn's hope wavered amid a gathering hush. No birds sang, no streetwise apprentices japed with their masters. Even the unlicensed spellhawkers had shuttered their wares, their usual litanies of trickster charms swallowed by something larger, dread-soaked, more absolute than fear. Liora's eyes stung, not just from sleeplessness, but from the granulated ache that followed every draining brush with soulcraft, soul-weaving. Even now, a residual chill prickled along her veins where the birchboard's runes had drunk her memory, raw fatigue thrumming in her marrow. She wished Sin's words. His cautions and brittle wisdom felt heavier than her own trembling, but as she watched the market below, neither logic nor old law could soothe the dread sharpening her senses. She barely had time to register the unnatural silence before it shifted, bent, like slate warping under boiling water. Down the arc-lit steps that faced Northgate's plaza, a small procession emerged. Figures swaddled in dusk-pale cloaks, their hoods unsettled by no wind, faces lost in folds that drank rather than reflected light. Footfalls slipped across the cobbled market not with sound, but with the suggestion of sound, as if memory itself might forget their tread. Between them, iron-banded chests creaked upon ether-bound sleds, with every jolt jagged flecks of silvery dust billowed out, tumbling over the warded stones in lazy arcs, tracing foxfire whirls that lingered where they should have fled. A shudder scurried up Liora's spine. She pressed harder against the gallery's auric-laced balustrade, the faintest effort sapping already withered reserves. Nothing overt declared the procession's nature, no badge or war cry, yet dread radiated outward, numbing as cold brine. She did not need Sin's scholar lore to recognize the taint, Eclipse Thralls. Their number was modest, perhaps 8, perhaps a dozen. She could not bring herself to count, for every time her mind flickered across a face, the features blurred, sliding from focus as if she'd glimpsed them through roiling ink. What she noticed instead, the rhythm, precise, relentless, every hand gloved and empty but for the guiding of those battered chests. One thrall paused to adjust a latch, exposing a wrist cross-hatched with rune burns, letters that meant nothing to her waking mind, but tugged at the edge of nightmare, familiar in the way of fever recollections. Soul-weaving's mark upon a body, stripped of all sanctuary, and everywhere the dust fell, magic misfired. Liora watched as a hunched, bewigged woman scraped a protective sigil along her shop's threshold. The chalk edge sputtered where the comet sheen settled, the rune crumpling inward and dissolving with a weak plaintive moan. Rune-menders, 3 bowed men and 1 woman in indigo sashes, froze mid-etch, styluses poised above stone, eyes flaring wide with appalled recognition. None dared approach. Even the living cairns, those shuffling ancestor stones that tottered toward the market square every dawn to barter in riddles and wisdom, retreated, their ghostly house lights dimmed, uncanny gaze averted. Liora forced herself to remain still, unsheathing her soul's presence only enough to sense the currents bending around the thralls. Danger and weakness pulsed in each inhalation. To open herself further would risk a spill, a slip, and her art's price already hollowed her out, left her cold-edged and brittle. Yet the urge to touch the seams, to feel exactly how the world thinned in these invaders' wake, pressed hard as thirst. Below, the marketplace seated before the procession, a tongue of silence widening with every step. Wrought fragrant wind scattered beneath the archways, pressing the crowd against shadowed walls. The merchant's eyes glittered, not with avarice, but with the frantic animal calculation of those gauging escape. Overhead, sigil lamps guttered, their moonglass filaments stuttering between pulses, unable to hold a coherent glow where the silvery fall dusted stone. From behind her, Liora caught movement, her own reflection, warped in the gallery's glass, brow furrowed, jaw tethered by unspent fear. The residual chill surged anew as she recognized that lurking shimmer. Familiar, foreign, not one of the marketplace's glamour words, nor her own memory shade. Something watched through the glass, peering from behind the world's skin. Her vision blurred at the edges, the split-second pressure of otherness, a damp mist rising on a day grown too dark for dew. Liora pressed her thumb to the birchboard, sought the first rune, the forked sigil for anchoring, old as the city's roots. Power twined from her, slow and clumsy. The connection was there, drawn thin, threatened by that dust, but present, binding her to now, to herself, confining the spread of the thrall's magic fracturing. She gripped that line of strength, cost slicing keen along her nerves. Each moment in the birchboard's grip seemed to leach not merely magic, but recollection. A toddler's laugh by the Veilshatter stream, the exact shape of her mother's sigh, lost warmth, traded for stability. The world steadied. Her determination reknit itself, ragged but aligned. She angled her gaze, forced herself to look down again. The thralls were nearly beneath her now, the battered chests glinting dully, their surfaces scrawled with wards, breakage runes, ill-fated attempts at prevention, some worn and knotted, others newly scratched by a desperate hand. What manner of relics rested within? She felt them. Aches, ripples tugging at the half-dormant pool inside her soul. Their silvery dust was more than simple blight. It interfered with the city's lay, a deliberate poison. As a soul weaver, her affinity ached to mend, but every thread she touched tried to unspool, the chest's contents radiating cruel, crooked hunger. On the lower level, a sudden cry. One of the Rune-menders, the woman in indigo, tried to block their path, arms upraised, words igniting bright and sharp in the runic tongue. By codex and compact, a vestra forbids unsanctioned relic passage. Reveal your freight or stand before the Senate's reckoning. A ripple traversed the thralls. Not a threat. Something colder. The nearest figure shifted, its cowl dipping, slanting its face toward the woman. A wash of the silvery dust lashed her, coiling, sparkling, beautiful as night frost. Where it touched, her words clotted in her mouth, the runes she'd conjured unmaking themselves, their memory erased before anyone save Liora could witness the shape they'd taken. The mender staggered, eyes wide with horror, then, miraculously, willed herself back to her feet, retreating with a bitter oath pressed tight behind locked lips. The crowd shrank from her, as if simple proximity might draw the curse. There it was, the promise of catastrophe, radiant and unhurried. The thralls moved on, leaving only the battered chest marks upon the stones, the silver fume, and a city unwilling or unable to bar their way. Liora's skin crawled. The feel of it, how the dust gnawed at runework encoded centuries past, how the crowd was forced to remember its impotence, spurred dread and a sharp upwelling of guilt. It should be her place to intervene, yet even now, the drain of her art prickled, warning of collapse if she tried to do more than witness. She cursed her fragility, the shattering that had begun in last night's dream, the emptiness opening whenever she tried to summon her mother's face. From the procession's center, a thrall half turned and, as if sensing her gaze, raised a hand, long-fingered, marked at every knuckle with ink gone brackish. The gesture lingered, halfway between beckon and benediction, acknowledgment and threat. Beneath the cowl, Liora glimpsed something that should not have been, the glint of mirrored pupils, swirling with pale motes. She recoiled, bile rising, sure her presence had been registered. Unbidden, a sharp curl of the Veilborn's presence caressed the inside of her skull. A whisper, curling smoke-like around her memories. "Don't look away." The words pressed in, neither heard nor spoken, a suggestion that slithered between waking and dream. Liora fought it, mind shivering against the tide of unwelcome attention. The birch board pulsed, weak as a caged bird, her hand tightened, nails biting. In its living memory, 1,000 warders' warnings stirred, cost, consequence, and one cardinal command. In the presence of unmade things, do not open. Below, the thralls reached the market's heart, halting beneath the central vault, where the scholar's statue, once proud, stood pitted and afraid. The chests hitched to a stop. For a moment, the city's watches and bells, always slightly out of concord, chimed in imperfect harmony, time itself looping, uncertain. The crowd waited, stricken, for a violence that might never arrive, or for a rupture that would rewrite every market morning hence. But nothing overt happened. The silence remained, yet it swelled, as if the world's skin stretched thinner still. The air's auric weight doubled. Sigils along stall thresholds shimmered like heat illusions, then blinked out, hollow. The thralls did nothing, and that doing was terror enough. Their presence teased the city's wounds, daring someone, anyone, to test the depth. Liora dragged air through tight teeth, fighting for calm. Her exhaustion made her mind slick and slow. A sideways glance at the nearest bridge, the old spirit arch, rune-graven and failing, its light gone to sullen blush. She saw shadows cluster at its far foot, blacker than the morning, not moving with the pace of men or ghosts. A single Virilian songbird, wings flickering candle-bright, darted near the procession, then veered away, feathers shedding iridescent motes that died before reaching the ground. Even nature recoiled. She sensed, more than saw, small points of courage brewing at the market's rim. A pair of traders clutching salt bowls to their hearts, a cradle woman drawing her child behind a pillar, a gouty old man fingering a prayer stone and voicing breathless supplication to the Starless One, hoping for mercy or miracle. But no one stepped forward. Not truly. Unbidden longing knifed through Liora, a yearning for the times before, when memory did not cost so much, when a warding rune was enough, when her mother would hold her and hum the threads of the world whole again. That ache threatened to unmake her. But she steadied. If she gave in, the thralls would not need to break the city. It would shatter under the weight of its own fear. She pressed her cheek to the birchboard's cool, rough runes, whispered the stunted promise Sen had left with her. Hold to memory, anchor in consequence. You are not yet unmade. At the market's center, the thralls began their passage anew, turning, driving their chests along the spine of the square toward the Senate's distant towers. Their exit was silent, but for the scrape of sled and the scent of burned iron, the promise of ruin trailing in their wake. Here and there old runes flickered with fresh pain, as if the city itself winced away. And as the last thrall vanished through the council gate, the dust finally began to settle, drifting down as if to bury all trace, promising that what began this morning would echo in nightmares long after market day had ended. Above, Liora straightened, strength hollow but undiminished, watching as hope and horror mated in the city's bones. The moment was not yet over. There were choices soon to be made, counsel to seek, before the shadow behind mirrors claimed Avestra for its own.